Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Lantern Sports Preview Show. I am your host, Curtis Gruby, alongside virtually my co-host, Kevin Lapka. Kevin, we've got a big game on Saturday, don't we?
It's the college football playoff semifinal of the All-State Sugar Bowl featuring Ohio State and Clemson. Curtis, a familiar foe, the Clemson Tigers. Remember, these two teams faced off last year in what was a thrilling game, but unfortunately a loss for Ohio State, 29-23. We don't have to talk about any sort of play that happened that may have affected that or any interceptions, but it was a loss, 29-23. It's a new year, though, Curtis. It's 2020. These teams are a little bit different. Curtis, let's take a look at the stats between these two teams here this year.
Yeah, Ohio State and Clemson are really neck and neck in terms of offense and total yards per game. Ohio State with 529.2. That is sixth in the FBS. Clemson not too far behind with 517.9. That is eighth in the FBS. If we jump down to points per game, Ohio State with 42.5 points per game. That is fifth. Clemson with 44.5 points per game. That is third. So offensive, statistically, they look very similar, just about the same. What about the defenses, Kevin?
Yeah, let's take a look at those defenses because, you mentioned these offenses, both very talented. So are the defenses as well. Let's take a look at it. Let's look at opponent rush yards per attempt. I like to look at rush yards per attempt a little bit more than rush yards per game because sometimes that's based on volume in college football. But you look at Ohio State, 3.4, holding opponents to just 3.4 rush yards per attempt. That's very good, 14th in the FBS. But Clemson even better, 2.9. Sixth in the FBS. And now let's look at opponent pass yards per game. So we're going to look at the rush and the pass. Ohio State, 260, 101st in the FBS. Clemson there, 210.9, 41st in the FBS. But people ask, how is Ohio State going to stop Clemson? How are they going to have success? Well, why don't we look at last year? Let's look at what Clemson did to them last year and how they can learn from that. Trevor Lawrence last year was the leading rusher for Clemson with 16 carries for 107 yards and 1 touchdown. If you remember in that game, Trevor Lawrence was getting first downs like this. At the snap of a finger, you're just rolling out, boom, first down on 3rd and 3, 3rd and 5. You have to halt the Clemson Tigers on 3rd down. That's the key for this team. And Ohio State is going to need to have a little bit of success rushing the ball. J.K. Dobbins had 174 yards rushing and 1 touchdown last year. But this is a better Clemson run defense statistically this year. So we'll see how that holds up. But let's go over to the pass game here. Curtis is going to have his first factor fiction about Justin Fields, who had 2 interceptions the last time Ohio State played Clemson last year. But the question for him is Justin Fields, no turnovers in the game. Curtis, you going factor fiction for that?
Well, the reason why we chose a factor fiction like this is because, Justin Fields, he's thrown 5 interceptions in his past 3 games. He threw 3 against Indiana and he threw 2 against Northwestern. And I don't think it's uncommon knowledge to understand that Justin Fields is struggling. I think that he is putting the team on his shoulders a little too much because at the end of the day, this is Ohio State. They have athletes. They have 4 or 5-star recruits. Justin Fields does not need to do it all. And I think that the game plan for Clemson is going to be just that. Justin Fields not having to do it all. Trey Sermon said in his press conference yesterday that Justin Fields is playing like a different animal this week, and they think he'll come out and he will come out sharp. So I'm going to go fact. I don't think Justin Fields will turn the ball over in this game. I think they're going to run the ball more, so that will help Justin Fields' case. But I think that he does have a clean game, and I think that he plays a lot better than he's played in the past 3 games. But, Kevin, your factor fiction, Clemson's defense halts Ohio State's run game. We both know that Ohio State wants to run the ball on Saturday. Do you think Clemson's defense will allow that?
Well, Curtis, they might not have a choice. If we see what happened to them against Northwestern where Justin Fields gets shut down and Ryan Day says, you know what, we just got to go to the run and stick with that, and that's what was successful, that they may very well have to do that. Like I mentioned, Justin Fields had 2 interceptions last year against Clemson. Who knows? Curtis is predicting no turnovers, but you never know. If they do get into a situation where they're going to have to run the ball, will they have success? I think they will. Last year, like I mentioned, J.K. Dobbins ran for 174 yards. Yes, this is a slightly better Clemson run run defense. But when you have guys as versatile as Trey Sermon and Master Teague, it's hard to stop those two guys. Now, what we've been talking about all year, Curtis, is it doesn't necessarily just have to be one guy all game. It doesn't have to be just the Trey Sermon game on Saturday, but it also doesn't just have to be the Master Teague game. Get them both in the mix. They bring different things to the table. They're very different runners. You can confuse the defense and throw a lot of things at them if you use those guys interchangeably. So I'm going to go fiction. I think, like you mentioned, they are likely going to rely on the run. They have in the past few games. It looks like that's kind of their identity on offense all of a sudden. And it's been a kind of a paradigm shift there as far as their identity, but it looks like they're now sort of a running identity team. So I'm going to say fiction because mainly I think it's going to be a high volume of rushing for the Ohio State offense. And when you have guys like Sermon and Teague, those two guys are very hard to stop.
Yeah, you mentioned Sermon and Teague being very hard to stop. And we also have to mention just how much they complement each other too. Master Teague being a big bruiser back, you need a couple yards, you put Master Teague in, you're going to get him. And then as we saw in the Big Ten championship game, Trey Sermon, he's electric. He can get off chunk plays, 20, 30, 40-yard runs. And I just think that especially later in the year, they've complemented each other so well. And you're right, it's going to be very hard for Clemson to stop this Ohio State rushing attack. But that's all the time we have today. That's going to do it for us for the Lantern Sports Preview Show. Make sure you look out for us after the game. And during the game, you can follow along with us on all of our social medias and our YouTube. I'm Curtis Gruby. That's Kevin Lapka. And we'll see you next time.